So where does this mesoderm appear? It will appear between the ectoderm and the endoderm. The first movement of fetus along with the appearance of hair on the head of the fetus are usually observed in the 5th month. The placenta should develop because it forms a connectivity between the mother and the fetus. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the last session of chapter 3 of 2nd PUC, that is human reproduction. I am Dr. Divya, biology faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about menstrual cycle and we learnt about fertilization and implantation. Now, since we know how fertilization occurs and implantation takes place, we can move into the next step, that is pregnancy and lactation. So, we shall start with pregnancy and embryonic development. So, immediately after the implantation. So, where does the implantation occurs? If you remember in the previous session we had discussed, so the blastocysts that were formed, they get embedded or implanted in the endometrium of the uterus. And after implantation, the inner cell mass of the embryo or the inner cell mass. So, in the blastocyst, inside it was made up of 2 layers, right? An outer layer of cells, and in the middle there were few cells that were present. So, those cells that were present inside the cells, which is called as the inner cell mass, or in particular it is called as the embryo, that will next, after implantation, it will differentiate into an outer layer which is called as the ectoderm and an inner layer which is called as the endoderm. Now, what is the blastocyst, or those cells that are present inside the blastocyst, which is called as the embryo having? It is now after implantation having an outer wall, that is ectoderm, and an inner wall, that is endoderm. And also between the ectoderm and the endoderm, very soon, within a short span of time, a mesoderm or a middle layer will appear, which is called as mesoderm. So, where does this mesoderm appear? It will appear between the ectoderm and the endoderm. So, these 3 layers, that is the ectoderm, the outer layer, the mesoderm, the middle layer, and the endoderm, the inner layer, will give rise to all the tissues or organs in the adults. So, that is why during embryonic development, the formation of these 3 layers are very, very important. And the inner cell mass, which is called as the embryo, it contains a lot of cells which are called as stem cells. And these stem cells are the ones which have the capability or the potency to give rise to all the tissues and the organs. So, therefore, the stem cells along with the 3 layers that are covering the embryo are important if all the organs such as the eyes, the limbs, the digits, the ears, the nose, everything, the brain part, everything, if it has to develop properly in the fetus inside the mother's womb, these tissues are very, very important. Next, what happens after this? The placenta will start to develop. The placenta should develop because it forms a connectivity between the mother and the fetus. So, proper nutrition as well as oxygen, all that will be supplied to the fetus through the placenta, which is nothing but also called as the umbilical cord. So, therefore, the placenta will start to develop. So, you can also see the placenta, which is also called as the umbilical cord with its vessel. So, you can see here the embryo that is present, and also there is the cavity of the uterus that is present, and you can see the embryo surrounded by 3 layers. So, these 3 layers are very important, and I have told you what is the function. So, the placenta, it facilitates or it promotes the supply of oxygen and nutrients to the embryo from the mother, and apart from that, it also helps in the removal of carbon dioxide and excretory waste material of fecus that is produced by the embryo. So, this is a very important question. They can ask in the exam, what is the function of the placenta? So the function of the placenta is to supply oxygen and nutrition to the fetus, remove excretory waste from the fetus. And the placenta, it is connected to the embryo through an umbilical cord, which helps in the transport of substances to the placenta and from the placenta. It helps this particular umbilical cord, which is a part of the placenta, it helps in the supply of oxygen and nutrition to the placenta and helps in the supply of the excretory waste from the placenta. So therefore, umbilical cord is also very important here. Apart from this, the placenta also acts like an endocrine tissue. So we all know that an endocrine tissue is the one that secretes certain hormones. So this particular placenta, it helps in the secretion of certain endocrine hormones like human chorionic gonadotrophin hormone, that is HCG. It helps in the secretion of human placental lactogen hormone, that is HPL, and also it helps in the secretion of estrogen and progestogens. All these are very, very important throughout the process of pregnancy for the normal development of the fetus, and also it is important for the mother as well. So therefore, one more function of the placenta is to secrete certain hormones, that is the HCG, the HPL, the estrogen and the progestogens. And in the later phase of pregnancy, a hormone called as relaxin is also secreted by the ovary. Apart from that, all these hormones, that is the human chorionic gonadotrophin hormone, the human placental lactogen hormone and the relaxin, which is secreted by the ovary, whereas HCG and HPL are secreted by the placenta. All these are produced only when the woman is in a pregnancy, that is during the 9 months. After the childbirth, all these hormones will not get secreted. So that is why the development of the placenta as well as the secretion of the relaxin from the ovary is very, very important. And apart from that, in addition to the increase in the hormones during the pregnancy, what were the hormones? The HCG hormone, the HPL and the relaxin. Apart from that, certain other hormones such as estrogen, progestogens, cortisol, prolactin, thyroxine, which is a thyroid related hormone, all that are increased to several folds in the mother's blood. So all that get increased in the mother's blood, and this increase in the production of all these hormones are very, very important or essential for supporting the growth of the fetus or for the fetal growth. And also it is very important to support any metabolic changes that occur in the mother, and also these are very important to maintain a healthy pregnancy. So that is why these hormones especially get secreted during the time of pregnancy. And not just that, some of the hormones they get secreted during other times also, but they are in minimal level. Their level increases during the time of pregnancy to maintain a healthy pregnancy of the mother as well as to maintain a healthy fetus or the growth of the fetus in the mother's body. So next let us study about human pregnancy. How many months does it last and how exactly the embryo further develops? Because now we know that the embryo would have developed the formation of the placenta with the umbilical cord, then it gets surrounded by 3 important layers. The placenta will start producing all the hormones, all that we came to know. So in female, the pregnancy lasts for 9 months, and the first sign of whether the fetus is growing properly or not is noticed usually by listening to the heartbeat by using a stethoscope. So the heartbeat is listened or the heartbeat is felt, and counting the number of heartbeat, the growth of the fetus is calculated. And by the end of the 2nd month of pregnancy, the fetus will start to develop limbs and digits, that is hands and fingers and legs and toes. And by the end of the 12 weeks, that is by the end of the 1st trimester, most of the major organ system in the fetus, for example, the limbs, the external genital organs of the fetus and various other organs will be very well developed. And the first movement of fetus along with the appearance of hair on the head of the fetus are usually observed in the 5th month, and by the end of about 24 weeks of pregnancy, that is at the end of 2nd trimester. When it is 12 weeks, the first trimester will come to an end. 24 weeks, the 2nd trimester will come to an end. So when the 2nd trimester comes to an end, the body of the fetus gets covered with very fine hair, and the eyelids which were formed and which were closed, they will start to separate, and the eyelashes will start to form. And by the end of the 9 months of pregnancy, that is when by the completion of the 3rd trimester or by the end of the 9 month of pregnancy, the fetus will become fully developed and it is ready for delivery. So now it is ready for delivery, which is called as parturition. So now let's see what happens during the time of delivery, how exactly it occurs after the 9 months or the end of the 3rd trimester. So the average duration of human pregnancy is about 9 months, as I told you, and that 9-month period is called as the gestation period, which is actually calculated in the form of weeks, like how I said 12th, 5th week, 12th week, 24th week, right? So like that they calculate it. So that is how they calculate, or 5th month, month-wise or week-wise they do the calculations. So when it is time for the delivery of the baby, or when it is time or when the 9 months get completed, vigorous contraction of the uterus will occur. So when contraction of the uterus occurs, so what contracts here? It is the endometrium, the thick endometrium layer that is there, it will start to contract. So vigorous contraction of the uterus will start to occur, and it will cause expulsion, or it will cause the delivery of the fetus, or it will cause the fetus, as the uterine contracts, it will start to push the fetus outside the female body through the vagina. And this process of delivery of the fetus is called as parturition. So after 9 months, what will occur? Parturition or childbirth will occur. And parturition is actually caused by the function of neuroendocrine mechanism. That is, the nervous system along with the endocrine hormones, all these participate in the parturition process or in the childbirth process, which occurs because of vigorous contraction that occurs in the uterus. And the signals for parturition. So after 9 months, there has to be some signals that it is time for childbirth, right? So those signals that occur in the form of pain, the signals of parturition originate from the fully developed fetus and the placenta, and these signals are the ones which induce mild uterine contractions called as the fetal ejection reflex. A pain will start to develop. That will be an indication that the female is ready for a childbirth, and that pain occurs because of the contractions that occurs in the uterus, and it is called as the fetal ejection reflex. So this fetal ejection reflex actually triggers the release of a hormone which is called as oxytocin from the maternal pituitary gland. Oxytocin is one of the happy hormones. You have studied about this in your first PUC. And oxytocin, it acts on the uterine muscle and it causes the uterine to contract even more strongly, which in turn further stimulates the secretion of oxytocin. So first, mild contraction will start. When this mild contraction will start, it will notify the pituitary gland to release oxytocin. When the oxytocin releases, further contraction will start, and further when again the oxytocin releases, the further contraction will start, and therefore it will result in the fetal ejection reflex or in the parturition process. So this particular stimulatory reflex that occurs between the uterine contraction and oxytocin erection. What is the relationship? Because I told you, when the uterine will start to contract, mild contraction will occur. So when mild contraction occurs, what happens? Pituitary gland will get activated. That pituitary gland will start secreting oxytocin. Oxytocin will further increase the contraction. So how can you say that the contraction is increasing? You can feel the increase in the pain in the uterus region. Next, again, further oxytocin will get stimulated, it will start to increase, again it will increase the parturition, or it will increase the contraction of the uterus, and it will increase the pain further. So this relationship between the contraction of the uterus and the stimulation of the pituitary to release oxytocin will continue, result until stronger contractions are achieved. They will continue, and this will lead to the expulsion or the pushing of the baby out of the uterus through the birth canal, and this particular process is nothing but called as parturition. So for parturition, which is a hormone that is very important, oxytocin. So always keep this in mind because it is an important 1 mark question. And once the infant is delivered, the placenta is also expelled out of the uterus along with the infant, and that placenta will, which is nothing but the umbilical cord, it is cut by the doctors, which leaves a small hole called as the belly button. So this is how the parturition process occurs in the case of human beings. Next, after parturition, it is time for the mother to start lactating. Why? Because the baby the baby is out into a new world, right? It was inside the mother's womb where all the nutrition was provided by the mother. But now when it is in the outside world, it cannot directly depend on the food of the outside world. So that is when the baby has to develop good amount of immune cells in itself. And if good immunity and growth has to occur to the baby, then lactation or feeding of the baby with the breast milk is very important. So we shall study what lactation is. So that is why in the first session we had studied mammary glands also as a female reproductive structure. So here the mammary glands of the female, it undergoes differentiation during pregnancy and it will start to produce the milk. So it will have a lot of lobe-like structures or balloon-like structures which were called as the milk ducts, which hold the milk, and there the milk will start secreting towards the end of the pregnancy, and that particular process is called as lactation. So the secretion of milk by the end of pregnancy is called as lactation, and this milk actually helps the mother in feeding the newborn. It helps in feeding the newborn because of newborn will not be capable of feeding on to other kinds of foodstuff. So that is why. And the milk that is produced during the first few days of lactation, or during the initial few days of lactation, it is called as colostrum. And this colostrum, it contains a lot of antibodies, and therefore it is very important to feed the baby with this colostrum milk that is secreted by the mammary gland, because antibodies are needed for the baby to protect itself or to gain resistance against various diseases that are there in the outside world. So therefore, feeding of colostrum to the baby is very important. And breastfeeding during the initial period of the infant growth is always recommended by the doctor in bringing up a healthy baby, because this is the reason, because that milk will contain a lot of antibodies in it. So this is about lactation. So I hope you understood this session well, wherein we studied about the process of parturition. That is, before parturition we studied how the embryo development takes place once the implantation occurs in the uterus. So all that month-wise, that is each trimester wise, what happens we came to know, and what type of hormones are released we came to know. We came to know the function of the placenta, and also we understood about parturition, that is how exactly childbirth occurs, and oxytocin is a hormone that is needed during that time, and also we came to know why lactation is important and how lactation occurs. So this was about this particular session. And with this, I hope you understood the complete chapter wherein we have discussed about the human reproductive system. So we shall meet again in the coming sessions with a new chapter. Thank you.